Greetings, dear ones. I'm Kryon of Magnetic Service. Joy of revelation is appropriate in the audience. And so many of you are hearing messages that make sense. And you're hearing them from a source that is not necessarily one that others would listen to. And that's what I want to talk about. For only a brief period of time in these moments, I want to give you a teaching channel. Some channels extremely loving, some are stories. Some talk about the ethereal things that no one knows or can see yet. Some talk about that which is in the mountain. Because we are still in McCloud in this series of channelings, in that which is called a channeling retreat. Dear ones, if you have come upon this particular message and you've not really heard many of the Kryon messages before, or perhaps you sit in the audience for the first time, and you've come here because you've heard some messages, but not many. I'm aware of that. There are some concepts which we have been giving for years. But how could you know that? How could you be the recipient of all of the channels in a row and know all of the things that have ever been mentioned? And you can't. And so there are those that reveal this in the questions they ask. Both the direct questions and the ones that are non-direct, the ones we know you're thinking about. One of the greatest statements of quantity, that means how many times it's been mentioned by Kryon, has been the fact that you are moving out of linearity. And there are many who will say, we don't really understand that. You talk about this all the time, but we don't really understand. And what does that really have to do with the love of God or the shift or the change or any of these other things that you've been talking about, even the ones in the mountain? Can you explain, Kryon, what you mean that we're too linear or we're moving from linearity to something else? And so I will. Yet again. And I want to talk to you about this in a way that will be clear to you. And so that it will answer questions, perhaps even about what's next. There are so many questions that are practical, that make sense to you in your reality. And many times I will answer them as though I were not aware of your reality. What if I told you this? Reality is a moving target today. And that reality for so many human beings is beginning to shift from an old energy of linearity, there's the word again, to something else. You live in a way that is in dimensions that are constrained. And you're going to slowly move from those constraints to a dimensionality which you don't see yet. And the one you're in now is ones of straight lines. That's the linearity. So let's present some examples of what you're used to. And as you hear these things, you'll say, and? Because they're normal. And they're what's all humanity has ever had. And I'm going to try to present to you what is happening or what's going to happen in the paradigm shift of reality. As you literally lift yourselves up in consciousness from straight lines to circles, to ways of thinking that are not anything like today, ways of teaching nothing like today. And it's starting to occur very slowly. Let's go to where you're all familiar, school. You've come from school, and you were all taught in a linear fashion. Now, here is linearity. You're sitting in a class with other children, and you have a book, and you have a teacher. Perhaps there is a board she writes on or he writes on, and you're learning mathematics. And all through school, in these beginning grades, you learn about the numbers. The next level is you learn how they go together and how you see them and say them. And the next level, how to add them together and how to subtract them. The next level, how to multiply them. And you might carry around a beginning book that would show you these things. And that is linear. You go from level to level to level. Now, going to the next level is your statement of a higher position of knowledge. It was used even today on the stage with esoteric things. And the reason is because that expression, dear ones, you understand, but do you understand also it is purely linear? Because levels is linear. 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. And you also understand that you cannot start at 4 because you don't have the knowledge of 1. That's linear. And there would be those who say, well, Kryon, of course that's linear. That's the only way it can be done. You got to walk before you run. Really? That's linear. And you would say, you mean to say that there's a reality where you don't have to walk before you run? Yes, there is. I'll present it to you in a way that you'll know what I'm talking about, and yet it'll still be a mystery because you're not there. When you learn about spiritual things, I would like to say that you are landing right in the most linear teaching that exists. In all of the religions, but perhaps 2 on this planet, all of it is linear taught. Think for a moment. When you go into the church, whatever it is, or the synagogue, you are given linear information, usually from a book or one who would teach you. And you would sit and receive linear information about God. And so many times that linear information starts with the history of the years, of the things that have happened. And you graduate then to the rules, the doctrine. And the doctrine is linear. Here's what happened, here's what's going to happen, here's what's expected, here's what to do, here's what not to do. And then you get into the other linear things. Here are the steps on how to please God. Here are the steps on how to displease God. Here is what to do in case you displease God. And you go over here and you do something else, and here are the steps. In some of your religions, you are given the tools. Here are the beads. Here are the other things that you must do. You must go to this person and report what you've done wrong. Do you see the linearity? Even in that which you will sit and pray, there is linearity. And you might recite certain prayers over and over. And in order to do that, you had to learn them. That's linear. That's your best guess, dear ones, in an older energy on how to talk to the creative source of the universe. That is the linear human being, and always has been. And you would say, well, Kryon, that's the way it works. That's just the way it works. And I want to tell you, you're right. That's the way it works. And that's going to change. Already, you're beginning to see things which are out of place. We spoke just recently about the field. The field is that which contains the potentials of the future. Not the future, but the potentials. And that is a multidimensional concept, and yet you're starting to see it. Years ago, we told you the field contained a potential of those who would see things differently than they see today. A field that contained what might happen if enough human beings had higher thinking and went to a place that they don't really understand yet. In that field were the potentials that you're seeing right now, if you recognize it or not. I told you that the field contained a higher integrity. Now, right away, you realize that's linear, because I just said higher. That's because I'll use linear descriptions and talk as long as I'm channeling with this man, because that's what you understand. What was in the field that I talked about that you now have? The integrity of relationships between human to human, which has expressed itself in gender discrimination. I told you it was coming, that there would come a time when you'd see a greater integrity of things that have always been in question. The dark side of humanity, I said, would start to expose itself, and it has. And now you're starting to object to what you see, whereas before you were afraid to. That's called increased light. I told you something is coming. It's in the field. It's a potential and not a prediction. That there is something horrible in this planet that has been going on universally for many, many decades. And it has to do with human slavery of children. I've told you that it is so prevalent. I've told you that there's money funding it that would horrify you if you knew where it was coming from. I've told you that there are those participating within it that would horrify you if you knew their names. I've also told you that it has been untouchable until now. Watch for this. For this is simply the next step of what's in the field that is not linear. It's not linear, is it, that suddenly things would start to occur that never did before? Where is the linearity of the steps of appropriateness of something that simply occurs? What if you're starting at level 4 instead of level 1 when something simply occurs? That's what I'm speaking of. And why do I go to this trouble to give you this? Because the next step I want you to think about. What is it you have? Yet again, I'll say, what is it you have that is nonlinear? It's so nonlinear you laugh about it. It's when you fall in love. Almost all humans at one time or another have gazed at a partner and gone a little nuts. And that's what takes place, a non-linear paradigm. It's not an emotion, dear ones. That is well defined. It's a whole body experience that's non-linear. And once you're in that state and you've seen this and you've felt it, there is a euphoria that you cannot explain. And if I said, where did you begin? Where does love begin? What's the first step of love? And you would say, it doesn't work that way. It just all appeared at once. It all just was there. And it affects how you think, and it affects your heart, and it affects your lack of anxiety and your euphoria. And that's a pretty curative place to be, I want to tell you, in love. It's nonlinear. I've said this before, and every mother knows, a common expression with Kryon and a paradigm of you looking into your child's eyes for the first time after birth. Where do you start? What's the first step of the love that you feel there? It's overwhelming to look at the child and the life that has come from you, and you see the future and the past, and you realize what's gone on there, and the beauty of this and the miracle of this, and the child opens its eyes and looks at you. What's the first step? There isn't one. That's non-linear. It's just there, and it's there all at once. God loves you all at once. There is no step to redemption where you come out of some evil, horrible condition as a human, and then you begin to gather the love of God. That doesn't exist. That's linear. So what we're trying to say to you is there is a paradigm coming of reality that will affect everything in that fashion. And the grease of it all is love and compassion and transparency and integrity. But what happens is before long, there is another way of thinking about the basic things I just told you about. Can you imagine a classroom of children that understands coherence? And the first thing they do is put their hands together, and they get into a coherent state, even as youngsters. And the teacher says, today we are going to have a lesson in mathematics. And through coherence, the children have a far better idea of numbers. And instead of a step-by-step, they're given concepts. The concepts of addition and subtraction and multiplication, the concepts of what numbers can mean and not mean, so that when they're done with a lesson, they start the problems. They start the solutions in mathematics. And they never had an A, B, C, and they never had a here's a number. Here's a higher or a lower number. But the concepts of the numbers were given all at once because they were in a coherent state. I just gave you the future teaching. Now, that's not going to be tomorrow, dear ones. But that's already been tried. The idea that human beings can tap into the field and see concepts which are always there, including numbers, mathematics, concepts of history, and not linear years. The concept of what has happened to humanity through history, instead of memorizing the years and the names and the battles and the numbers, the concepts of studying a dysfunctional society in the past and celebrating a multidimensional society in the future. Imagine a church with no linear teaching, where you report and instantly you feel the love of God, and you sit there. And as you sit there, all of the teaching you ever need to know individually with your name is given to you, because you sit and you're quiet in the love of God. Imagine going into a place with no doctrine and no prophet and no teachers. Imagine just a building. Imagine a building perhaps that has no walls. I've just given you the new way of realizing the Creator. I've given you a way that wipes away the steps of redemption. I've given you a way that is conceptual of who you are, who God is, and the fact that there really is no difference between you. The reality will be a moving target, and we've told you before, so profound will it be that old souls will find it first, and there will be a separation. And the separation will be old energy and new energy. It's going to be an issue, maybe even a problem in society, when certain individuals will live for 150 years on average, and others will still have an old paradigm and won't. And they will turn to you, dear ones, of a higher consciousness, and they will say that you have a pact with the devil. Because old energy cannot look up to a higher level. We've told you that consciousness is this way, and that you will fight this battle as humanity itself starts to become more non-linear. This is a teaching channel to remind you that conquering fear is not with a list. Or getting out of suffering is not with a list. Or getting out of grief doesn't happen with a list. It starts with erasing all of the rules and sitting and being loved by God in a vacuum, if you wish, of your own creation, where you're able to receive information with your name for what you're going through in a multidimensional way that you didn't expect. That's the truth. These are the things we wanted you to know in these few moments we have. All of the channels are teaching the same thing. This is the invitation, and always will be, to a magnificent human being that listens to this and is sitting in front of me. And so it is.